first Thursday club. Thank you for joining us. This morning we have Komali, Dr. Komali Yeneti from, and do correct me if that's wrong, Komali, from the University of Wolverhampton, who is a reader and a researcher, who's going to be talking to us about the role of green infrastructure in cooling cities, which sounds really interesting. So I'm looking forward to this. So I'm just going to hand you straight over to Komali, leave you in her capable hands.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everyone, first of all. How are we all doing this morning?
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Very good, thanks.
Great, that's great. I mean, it's not the best time to talk about a topic which is out there cold, but I hope we are there, right there. We're just almost there. So let me see if I can share my slides. Hopefully I can. Hopefully you're able to see my slides. Now, the issue is I can't see any of your chat. Or you basically, because I can see my slides. So if someone could just give a shout.
I'll keep my eye on the chat, Komali.
Perfect. Yeah. So if someone, Susan, please, if you could monitor the chat as well, that'd be great.
No problem at all. That looks good.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. So morning, everyone, again. So Susan, thank you so much for that kind invite and also doing the brief introduction as well. So I'll talk today about the role of green infrastructure in cooling cities. I know, like I said, we're not there yet about cooling, but I think as I talk through, as we go through some of the slides, especially when we talk about some of the UK context, you will see why the topic is so relevant and timely as well. So I will draw upon a range of examples and previous research that I did both in the UK, elsewhere around the world. So before joining the university in 2020, so I worked in Australia for quite a few bit of time. So a lot of the work you can see there is also relevant there, and some of the examples actually were drawn from Australia, and the topic is very relevant there. But of course, in the UK, it is also becoming an important topic. We've done recently a large bit on green walls, but also I'm currently working with the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, and as an academic secondee on an expert role working on overheating in buildings, especially homes. So we're looking at some of these examples, and I'll talk through those. So for today, it's a lot to talk about. The topic is quite vast, although as it seems to be, it's quite small, but it's a very, very immense, and it's like an ocean. As you go deeper, you can actually dig deeper. So what I'll be going to talk is a little bit about overheating. I'm so sorry about that typo there, overeating. Overheating, and then what it is actually, and how it is relevant as well for us, and drawing on some of the examples, especially how developing resilience to urban heat, especially through green infrastructure. Now, green infrastructure, you might have come across actually the climate change, mitigation and adaptation, which is the two big topics within the climate change. But both of them are very relevant and also very interrelated topics, but also as well very large. So we'll only talk about mitigation. So within this mitigation, all the different things that I'm going to talk about, like the green infrastructure, and again, like I said, because green infrastructure is such a vast topic, I'll touch upon some more of the examples. And this topic is very, very relevant. I'm sure some of you must be working on sustainable development goals, net zero, with targets of net zero, and how these can actually contribute to those policies and strategies, both at the UK level as well as international level. So most of the green infrastructure related stuff is mostly related to the sustainable development goals. I'm not sure how many aware of how many goals are there. So in my class, usually when I teach, I ask actually students how many goals are there and which ones are actually related to these. The goal number 11, which is the sustainable cities and communities, is something that we all are interested, I guess. So I'll touch upon some of the examples within the UK relevance, because we're talking about in the UK. So where possible, some of the examples from the UK. So first things first, So again, this is not a geography class or a physics class or something, but it's just touching upon some of the important basic fundamentals of overheating and where and how it needs to be done. So in an ideal world, if humans did not exist, or we all did not exist thousands of years ago, so our urban environments, or without the city's bit of it, would have ideally been a part of these four elements, which are basically atmosphere, which is, we know, the atmosphere, the biosphere, all that's on the ground, our plants, trees, shrubs, and so on, grass, etc., which existed on its own. And then, of course, hydrosphere, basically our water systems, so lakes, rivers, oceans, seas, and all of that. And then lithosphere and pedosphere, which is basically soils. So on top of this, we're all, of course, different parts of the built environment, industry. So our buildings, factories, and so on, they all sit on top of this. So this forms our basic urban ecosystem. So, so within this urban ecosystem, so like I said, without us, this would have something look like that. But on top of that, of course, we do love our tall buildings. So, and then we'll have, of course, fantastic new materials, glasses, concrete, tarmacs, etc. Of course, we love our cars, and then air cons. So all these different stuff that we as human beings have introduced into the natural environment have been contributing to the increasing anthropogenic heat release. So, which is, of course, it's a cyclic process. So the more it gets hotter, we want more air cons, and then the outside, some of you might have gone outside and see, oh, it's actually the heat release from the air cons is terrible. Which then contributes to again to more heat releases, which becomes basically a cyclic process. Also, a lot of the materials, tarmac, contributes to the reduction of evaporative cooling and increase of heat storage, especially glass and other materials contribute to heat storages and absorbs a lot of solar radiation. So all this contributes to the overheating. So in the UK, for those who might have not, I mean, you've seen last couple of years, it's especially the summers, extreme temperatures. So according to the climate change, so we've got this climate change report that we submit to the net zero commitments every 5 years. So the last previous report, it's actually projected that in the UK, we would reach about 40 degrees by 2030. Unfortunately, you might have already seen that last year we've already reached that 40 degrees for the first time ever in the history of the UK. So the projections are actually being broken down, and it's already we are facing the extreme temperatures. And some of these are, you can see those, this graphic at the bottom shows some of the extreme temperature events over our period. And you can see it's becoming more frequent, more prominent, and more extreme as well. So especially last couple of years, these extreme temperatures have resulted in excessive deaths year and again. And of course, temperatures contributing to the increased peak electricity demand, as well as outdoor temperatures reaching over 40 degrees. So for the first time ever last year. This means it's again becoming a cyclic process, which is we need more cooling, more energy for more cooling purposes, more air cons and other stuff, and especially in bigger cities. And but interestingly, one of the most important thing is that we see cities are becoming more vulnerable to extreme temperatures. You might ask me why specific cities? Because, as I said, I mean, all those previous slides are talking about why specifically cities, because of all the different things that we do in the urban built environment contribute to the overheating. But there is another phenomena that is specifically predominant and which actually contributes to the overheating, which is urban heat island effect, UHI, as it is called. Now, you might ask, what is UHI? In a simple terms, as you can see this graphic, the inner parts of the city becomes more hotter, or you feel more hotter in the inner parts of the city compared to the surrounding suburbs or the surrounding rural areas. And why this specifically happens? Because obviously because of all the different things in the built environment. So it is in generally characterized, say in a simple way, an island of heat surrounded by a sea of cooler areas. In scientific terms, it is basically a temperature difference within a city. So these parts, as you see, the inner areas, temperature difference between those inner city areas or city center to the surrounding areas. Urban heat island has been significantly contributing in around different parts of the world. There is evidence, of course, around 400 cities. I myself have done a lot of research with several other colleagues around the world, looking at evidence on urban heat island effect in different parts of the world. And we found that there is significant evidence, at least cities contribute, the urban areas specifically, within urban areas, cities contribute to more to urban heat island effect. And it has significant impacts on energy, human health, our ecosystems, decreased air and water quality. Interestingly, especially you might have observed this over summers, usually in summers, the nighttime temperatures are generally warmer as compared to even like early morning temperatures, something. And this is because of the urban heat island effect, because it gets slow. It's especially the cooling gets slower during the night, but whereas in the early morning temperatures then go down. So, but not everything is grey or dark. There is some green around the corner, and this is where the green infrastructure come into play. I'll go through, I hope you can see this video. And if you can identify, I'll not go through all of that because it's quite a bit of long video, just maybe a few seconds first for you. Now, for those who don't know, this is basically, this is Sydney. So we did a bit of research in Sydney looking at urban heat island in Sydney. As you go through this, I don't know if you have recognized those red bit of areas and green and blue. So those red bit of areas are actually the hard surfaces. So fantastically have rooftops, roads and so on. And then the green bits, obviously they are the trees, and the blue there, it is the Parramatta River, which is the western part of the Sydney. So with this actually shows those temperatures. You can see on the right, the band, which is basically the thermal band. As you can see, the red ones are almost like over 50 degrees compared to the greener ones, which is like around less than 40 or 36. This is during the extreme temperatures, which is like in January, mid of January and February. So this shows that green infrastructure is potentially a solution to us. We already know, I mean, we do know the plants and parks of all those things contribute to cooling effects within the cities. But where there isn't enough possibility of parks and large spaces, um, um, other sorts of green infrastructure, smaller elements of green infrastructure can play a significant role. For the next several slides, I'll go through these, especially what is green infrastructure and how the different elements of green infrastructure can contribute to cooling areas. And green infrastructure is a network of green spaces, of course, which includes water and natural areas within urban areas. So it's just not green infrastructure, but also, and you will see how water is actually also a fundamental element of green infrastructure. So it uses specifically nature processes to deliver multiple functions of a city, which includes the reducing the risk of flooding. We know flooding increasingly been, especially in the UK, and also cooling higher urban temperatures. There are different types of green infrastructure. Now, these are all just examples of green infrastructure, and they are not very comprehensive. You can add much more to it. We know from basic our parks and city trees, to, of course, more prominent recently, this urban agriculture is becoming more, very interestingly. It's not only contributing to cooling and also to other bits of air quality and other stuff, but also making more inclusive communities and bringing people together to do to a more inclusive environments. So apart from these different examples that I have shown, at a more decentralized scale, it is about moving from our grey infrastructure, say, for example, road bollards, to more street trees, to traditional roofs, to more greener living roofs, or more engineered solutions, especially for floods and things like that. Two more examples like sustainable urban drainages, bioswales, which are basically green swales, and also natural flood management systems. All these together becoming an integrated urban green systems, or sometimes called as water sensitive urban design. So in the recent times, people are talking about simple sustainable urban drainage to more water sensitive urban design or green urban designs. So such kind of new terminologies, which looks at integrating all the different elements of green infrastructure, like I said, from the basic street trees or parks to more water management and flood management systems. And these are all becoming as multifunctional, not just contributing to one particular function of either cooling or flood management, but also more things like aesthetics or recreational opportunities or inclusive communities or benefits for wildlife and so on. There is significant evidence, and the next few slides actually talk about the evidence in terms of contributing to cooling specifically cities along with multifunction. So for example, urban vegetation. So urban vegetation, interestingly, we think UK cities are very greener, but not really. The canopy cover in many UK cities are less than 20 cities. For those from Wolverhampton, you might be surprised. Especially in Wolverhampton, it is one of the cities in the UK to have least canopy cover. Interestingly, it is about only 10% or 11% more specifically. So it's much less than 20%. Ideally, in some of the greenest cities, like Exeter and a few other cities, it's about over 30%. So that's Exeter is like on the right hand end of the gradient, which is like really high green spaces. So increasing about 10% of tree canopy coverage will contribute about 15% surface temperature reduction, or 1.5 degrees UHI reduction. So in a simple way of just incorporating simple street trees or canopy cover will increase this. And parks, again, parks are significant contributors to cooling cities, and especially cooling much more in a localized areas or place-centric design. Air temperatures gradients for parks is about 0.1 to 1.5 degrees per 100 meters. So beyond the park, so within up to 100 meters, it's about 1.5. So the more percentage of park spaces it expands within that. But of course, it depends on different urban characteristics and also wind speed. This table on the right, actually, you can see the green areas, which is actually compact to the grey areas. So for example, you can see here the natural turf unshaded is about 23 degrees, whereas a natural turf shaded reduced to 20 degrees. So similarly, a paving unshaded is about 46, whereas a paving shaded becomes 32 degrees surface temperatures. So significant contribution to cooling cities. Where there is no possible, I mean, we've seen that increasingly cities are becoming less and less percentage in terms of the large green spaces or tree canopy covers in parks, which means we need to look for alternative ways of greenery. So one of the ways is green roofs. So green roofs are basically vegetated roofs in a simple terms. So installing simple greenery on top of roofs. Although it might be challenging for the regular slanted roofs, it's more useful for flat roofs. So some of the research, our research shows that in cities like London, increasing 30% of the total roof area within the city can actually reduce the surface temperature by about 0.06. Although it might sound very small at a global level, we're talking about the net zero commitments is bringing it under 2 degrees, which means you can assume that that small temperature will make a significant difference. Although also in addition, the vertical difference in terms of the temperature as you go to 100 meters above the ground level, it becomes about 0.25, which means the surface temperature as you go above the ground level, it increases. So tall buildings especially would benefit, especially the tall buildings like apartments, high rises would benefit from green roofs. So there are 3 different types of green roofs, which is extensive green roof, semi-intensive and intensive. So these 3 depends on the percentage of greenery or within these, and also across this gradient from low maintenance to regular or very high maintenance. So extensive green roofs would have low maintenance to intensive would be very high maintenance. So which includes well-maintained gardens, flat roofs, especially for flat roofs with access. Whereas semi-intensive, which is more sort of green roofs for higher demands, although these different types of roofs would also have, they're differentiated basically depending on building heights and also the plantations from small green roofs or shrubs to very high, like from extensive lawn or intensive lawn to more shrubs and trees. So other type of green infrastructure where it's becoming extremely popular in cities is the green walls. We know our IVs, English IVs, and or specific or traditional simple climbers, which are in a simple walls, to more extensive human managed green walls, or called as living walls. There are different types of green walls, as you see here. So I'll not talk about all of that, but generally these are the different types. And these depends on the types of so like I said, the green facades are basically the traditional green facades or continuous grids and examples like that. More recently, the living walls, which are much more managed ways, are becoming popular. In the recent times, we're also looking at new technologies like hydroponics living walls. This is where I was talking about previously. We were looking at a project, looking at a green wall by integrating hydroponics and to monitor biodiversity and aesthetics and public engagement in this space. The evidence shows that green walls can contribute to a temperature reduction up to 5 degrees externally surface temperatures, but also interestingly, internal temperatures as well by 2 degrees. Evidence also shows that green walls can contribute to energy savings by at least up to 30% minimum. Around the world, I mean, for those who have traveled extensively, maybe you have seen airports and countries like Singapore and other parts of the world have been resorting to this, especially where increasingly space is becoming a problem. So to kind of bring together all those things together and look at how these contribute to temperature reduction, you can see these 2 graphs. The one on the left, which shows the maximum temperature reduction, whereas on the right shows the average temperature reduction. So interestingly, the combination of all of these, so regular trees, two green roofs and other bits, combination together contribute a very high percentage, a very high temperature reduction, at least a maximum temperature reduction up to close to 2 to 2.5 degrees, which is very high as compared to any other strategies. So as I said before, in the recent times, it is not people, because obviously what the green infrastructure doesn't stand alone. It sits with water, because a lot of these is integrated within the water systems. You might have seen cities around the world are now moving to more walkable ways, walk pathways, and inclusive communities and engaging communities. So discarding our cars to getting it more towards to communities for more public engagement. So for example, the picture on the left actually shows how South Korea has moved an entire moving space from cars and flyovers to more public spaces and making placemaking as well. So these sort of green-blue infrastructure are especially useful in certain areas. Although it is important to remember, because we know water increasingly contributes to humidity, so it is not really useful in regions with high humid or high humid regions. It is useful in hot and arid regions, like Susan was saying. We have some colleagues from Middle East and generally, so potentially there, or in generally hotter areas. So water-based landscape can contribute this cold urban cooling islands, and it can decrease up to 3 to 8 degrees ambient temperature, which is good, especially when the humidity is less than 50%. But as with humidity increases, the temperature declines. So again, where there is no possibility of natural water bodies, cities around the world are, increasingly looking at alternative ways. So we know these smaller decentralized kind of water systems, including water fountains, sprinklers, water towers. Some of these examples you might have already seen in some cities. Even for those from Wolverhampton, you might have seen as you go to Wolverhampton city centre, there's this interesting sprinkler space, and in summer it really becomes busy with people around. And we did find that especially these can contribute to really, really high temperature reduction. So like as you can see, the sprinklers and water towers are becoming more common. So from these kind of integrated smaller things to much more larger, we're looking at integrated or interconnected green networks. So these kind of interconnected green networks are much more larger kind of so the previous ones we talked at more small building level to looking at larger. So for those who might have been to Singapore, so these photographs are from Singapore actually. So they are like more connecting green space towards to wider to with buildings. I mean, Singapore is such a small city that there is no possibility of having those small parks, or I mean large parks, or street trees. So where this is what is possible. Not just Singapore, but also we're seeing in London in 10 years ago, London came with this very interesting policy or strategy called London Green Grid, which is about connecting different long distance walks, green corridors, open spaces. This is a continuous evolving strategy. Even till today, it is an ongoing, and it has shown that increasingly more of these green spaces and open spaces and cycling routes and natural traffic spaces are being connected to help people adopt these kind of spaces as for walking, and also so I mean, you've seen some of these examples as well, like the London Loop or the Capitol Ring or the Jubilee Greenway. some of these. But also other cities around the world are doing similar things. Like I said, Sydney. There's an app in Sydney for Sydney Green Grid, where if you enter from A to B, although it shows maybe sometimes a longer route, it will pick you up the best possible green spaces. So you might want to walk through greener spaces, even if it's longer than walking on a high busy road. So such kind of apps are becoming really popular and people do want to use those. To more bigger forest cities. So these two pictures, the one on the right left is from Sri Lanka, and the one on the right is again from Sydney. So forest cities, so you might have come across some examples like China, looking at forest cities, which are international examples of ways to create sustainable urban development, which is like you might see buildings decked from top to toe with greenery. So one important thing, it's really important to look when we look at these green strategies or green infrastructure, is that it is very, very important to look at the scale for implementation. The scale goes all the way from a simple building or a neighborhood scale to a strategic scale. And it's important to look at the scale, because if we neglect the scale, the effect of the scale could really cause an erroneous characterization of the whole of the whole city or even the region. Because the strategies that are suitable at a certain scale may not be really useful at another scale. And the scale is usually, it's about picking up from like I said, from small neighborhood where you're looking at small, maybe a simple garden or a backyard garden or front yard garden, to small green roof at a building level, to all the way to strategic level, which is like the examples like the London Green Grid. We're looking at strategic corridors, trails, nature trails, or cross boundary networks, and so on. So so scale becomes really important. So I'll not go through all of that, but just to highlight those couple of examples where it's really important to look at scale, because embedding some of these strategies at that specific scale within those policies and strategies will have a knock-on effect on not just only cooling, but also other things like aesthetics, planning purposes, and so on. So if you think that green infrastructure is only really useful for cooling, it's not only that. There are multiple co-benefits of green infrastructure, which expands, of course, we talked about some of the examples like cooling and flood management and aesthetic purpose, but also increasingly people are looking at other benefits like there is evidence that walking for 20 minutes a day or even 30 minutes a day will improve mental health, well-being, social individual interactions, and so on. So green infrastructure are being looked at now. Cities are looking at green infrastructure as a ways to engage communities. Like for example, Paris is a very good example of urban agriculture. There are multiple urban agriculture within the city to bring communities together and as a way to social and individual coping capacities, along with other benefits. So it's really multiple co-benefits actually, and this graphic, as you see here, it's about how these multiple green infrastructures can contribute to multiple co-benefits, and the grade of co-benefits observed, the darker color, the darker gray is over 80% of that specific. So for example, as you see here, these ones, so the purple ones, all the different types of green infrastructure, apart from the regular, like the green roofs and other ones, would contribute to the health and restorative benefit and the social and individual coping capacities. This intervention matrix can actually show which green infrastructure can be suitable at what level, and especially in a scale of low to high. So from low is basically, which is low implementation, really impact, to very high is very possible. So in the inner city area, some of this work is actually, I'm currently working, like I said, the overheating work, which is happening with the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. We're looking at how some of the strategies could be implementable at the building scale, and how, in terms of implementation, can it be really useful? Because at the end of the day, housing associations or builders or developers or the councils would come up with these different types of buildings, and which strategies can be really useful. So you can see some of the strategies are like from single pedestrian pathway to like the green envelope, green roofs and green walls are really low, because at a street scale it's not really useful. Whereas at the street scale, trees and canopy or parks and stuff could be much more higher impacts, or intervention could be more useful than other strategies. So the most important is at the square level or the neighborhood scale, where some of these strategies can be really, really useful. We did do a lot of the research. I'll just pick up one example of a project that we did in terms of planning alternatives. So this is an example of a project that we did with Sydney. And this project was working with the City of Sydney, looking at developing a tool with multiple green infrastructure. So what happens is, when a builder or a developer submits a planning permission, so it goes through this tool, and then it shows up what is the impact at the neighborhood scale, in terms of the in terms of the urban heat island or overheating. And then on the right, as you can see, the planning alternatives. So it could show up, okay, this is what it's going to be. 10% of the green space or 20% of the green space is going to have this much impact on overheating or cooling. So you need to revise your percentage of green space within your building or the planning application. So that has been really useful, and it's under implementation. So there are many more projects, such kind of stuff that we did in the past, and examples like that. So, but I'll be happy to answer any of those questions. So this is, sorry, so this, as you can see, is the same. I'll be happy to answer any of those if you're interested, and we did a lot of work on those. So that's what I do. But generally, there's large amount of work in terms of some of the stuff that I talked about, and I'll be happy to talk any of those examples. Thank you very much, everyone. Yeah. So let me.
Thank you, Komali. I was looking forward to that, and you didn't let me down. That was really interesting. We have just had one question pop up in the chat. Is there evidence of using water sources for cooling in isolation of the green element? Do you get an effect of a heat store similarly to seas, thus raising winter temperatures?
Effect of a heat store similar to, okay, let me just read. Is there evidence of using water sources for cooling in isolation of the green element? Do you get an effect of a heat store similar to heat, thus raising winter temperatures? That's an interesting question. So I'm assuming this is about so when using water sources, basically the smaller ones or the larger ones, because the effect of cooling for water changes across the gradient. So from a simple, maybe a pond to a lake to a river to a more decentralized kind of like the sprinklers or other stuff. So it changes across. The heat store to similar, especially for the seas, it is an interesting one because, as I said, the seas are interesting. They contribute to heat storage, But in cities, like especially where there's humidity, it's already contributing to more further humidity. So, so we did a bit of work on Sydney where we looked at the eastern part of the Sydney compared to the western part of the Sydney, because Sydney is an excellent example of how this exam, because the eastern part of the Sydney benefits from the sea, the cool breeze coming from the sea, whereas the western part of the Sydney is actually, it has a desert on the western part. So the breeze doesn't really come into the western part, which means it's getting really bad heat from the western part of the desert part, whereas it's not really getting that heat, the cool breezes from the eastern part. So, but we do have evidence that even smaller water elements, any of these, some of the strategies that I did, mention about, do contribute to that. But we do have to remember it depends on this. So there is some amount of, so one of my colleagues, they're currently working on, like in Middle East, Saudi Arabia. It literally, the bit of research came yesterday. In those countries, water, we need to be very careful about water, especially where there is lack of water, so we may have to look at alternative strategies. So there, water might not be really useful, although it's a hot and arid climate. Water can be a useful strategy, but not really because there is no water there. So, so then we need to look at other strategies, which are like cool roofs, which are basically higher reflecting paints. And I didn't even talk about that. I can talk for hours and hours and hours for about some of those strategies. So it's really important. But generally, water. I mean, historically, we've seen humans we have evolved around where water is there, most of the stuff. So we've built our cities and urban environments, or in generally our environments have evolved around water bodies because of the way it contributes to multiple core benefits. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but please feel
Not
free
really.
to. Not really? Okay.
Okay, I'll give you the reason I'm asking the question. The green solution that you're suggesting, the trees, etc., and larger areas of crop, so to speak. I understand the massive benefit that will have, and it was a Victorian principle in their urban designs back in the day for helping to cool. A lot of the Victorian principles we're returning to now, to try and get our buildings cooler. But what I have seen is, if you use ground for heating in winter, and water for heating in winter, and cooling, what you tend to find is that there's a latent heat effect where you actually use it. It ends up cooling in the summer, but because you've then got a warmer surface in the winter, then that actually raises the temperatures in that locale in the winter period, but only by a degree or two. But obviously then that has an impact the following year and year and year and year. You actually end up stacking, the temperature goes up still, no matter what you're doing. So it was just
I got that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, if you're using ponds, lakes, and larger watercourses to create cooling in those larger areas, is there any evidence that because you've got such a hot environment around it, that whilst it's chilling, it raises the winter temperature?
Got that. No, thank you for that. So I think that's better than the message. In fact, actually, this is a good point. Actually, raising the winter temperatures, especially, this is where I think we in some parts of the world, at least not in the UK, we don't have enough evidence from the UK because of even for other evidence like impact of, in generally, even water within the UK is very, very minimal. But elsewhere, in other parts of the world, there is evidence about this. But importantly, this is where we cannot really depend on some of the water strategies, specifically in places where there's already certain amount of water bodies, but where there isn't enough, and this is where we look at alternative ways of evaporative cooling methods. So which is basically only contributing to the evaporative cooling, which contributes to the only summer temperatures decline, and they're not really contributing to raising winter temperatures. So, for example, paved surfaces, which is more like the regular tarmac, can, which is not really useful. Instead of that, if we use more like a greener pathways, not just exactly green path, we're looking at more towards more cooling based kind of paved surfaces, which are becoming more useful in some of the places. So I think in the UK, we don't have enough evidence about cooling, but yeah, you're right. Using water in such kind of places can potentially raise winter temperatures. And there we have to be very careful about what strategy is useful where. It's not everything suits the same, so it has to be tailor-made. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions for Komali?
I mean, just to add to that point. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
No, well, please do.
Now, just talking about this, some of the surfaces, especially the permeable surfaces and other surfaces, which are much more perhaps useful in specific areas in some of the UK, especially for us, not London or again in the UK, we have got like a range of temperatures, and UHI effect is itself very vast across the different cities. So some of these strategies are very, very city specific, and yeah, I just wanted to raise that. Oh yeah, sure. No worries. I can share the slides. Yeah, I can share the slides with Susan later, maybe, and then yeah.
Okay, super. Thank you. Carl, you have your hand up there?
Yeah, just a quick question. Obviously, like you've got so many existing buildings within the UK cities. Is there any I want to say like government funding in any such way to back this improvement?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting point actually. So this is where I'm currently working with the governments to look up if they can come up with some funding pots of money for a specific strategy. The government is very conscious about what strategy is useful and what strategy for which building typology, basically. So we currently looking at building on some of the evidence and see, and then the government want to put some funding. But currently we don't have as such, unfortunately, exact funding, but this piece of work, I mean, I've been having regular discussions with the department, and they want to, the evidence that we're putting together, which will come maybe published next year, the document by them by the department, and they want to identify which strategies are most useful for where, depending on that they will come up with maybe, yeah, funding.
It's going to be a difficult one because they've got to weigh up the options of where to go and how to do it, because obviously everything comes at a cost, doesn't it? With improving existing buildings.
It does.
And improving the infrastructure as well.
Yeah, it does actually improve. It does come with extra costs, but also, I mean, there are the benefits, like if you're going for a specific green rating system, so some of these strategies have to be ticked off anyways. Like if you're going through either LEED or specific other BREEAM or other sort of strategies, there is an extra point for some of these strategies. And again, like I said, not every single strategy is useful everywhere. So we have to be very careful about what we are using for which type of building. So there is some evidence about what strategy, again, how to install these. There were a couple of talks again, some of these green roofs and green vertical gardens, people to look at some of these strategies and how they can be, useful. But interestingly, the costs are coming down, because there's more and more, with the more kind of more scale of implementation and more examples and more scaling up in certain places, the costs are coming down as well. So, but yeah, there is some, and there are other parts of the world which is much more doing, but we are doing less, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
I can see Steve has his hand up again.
Sorry, this is a
That's
pet
all right,
area
Mark.
of mine. So yeah, I've got loads. Interestingly, you might want to think about, especially with the green element, the use of airflow for tall buildings. Because very tall buildings, as the Victorians used to do, if you make them porous and create a chimney effectively and let the air in at the bottom, which you could be pulling in from a green space, which would be cooler, because of the velocity that you get from the chimney effect going through the building, you can actually chill the building by 2 to 5 degrees just naturally by airflow. You don't have to do anything other than that. So those really tall buildings, it is a solution, especially if you are using green space, because the only reason it doesn't work in urban environments that well now is because the external temperature is hotter than the internal temperature. But if you're pulling the green space air in, I could see that would have a massive advantage without having any energy production whatsoever to achieve it.
Yeah, thank you for that bit of, especially the energy bit. I'll pick up on the energy bit actually. So there is evidence in terms of using the green roof, or again, like I said, the impact will change across cities, urban characteristics and everything. So some evidence shows that actually using green roofs can internally reduce temperatures, but also contribute to about at least 20 to 30% of energy reduction, which is massive, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the energy side of things. So these days, I was in the built environment for quite some time. But yeah, my main bag is sustainable energy. So the thing is making it so that you can do as much as you can without use of energy is the most efficient way forward. So yes, green roofs, green planting, water to some extent. Ground. The only one I still don't see the argument for at the moment is air source heat pumps. They don't contribute at all. In fact, they're a negative effect. But yeah, people want us to get away from gas.
True. No, true. I mean, that's what we want to do. At the end of the day, we have our net zero commitments. So and we need to do all the things that different sort of mixture, I guess. It's like it's like a plate of, all the different types of dips you have on the plate. So you have to got to right dip and see which one is really suitable for so each one of those. Each one of these strategies, especially all these strategies, especially the nature-based solutions, nature recovery solutions, and nature-based solutions are very, very specific to urban characteristics. So, and especially with the increasing UHI effect, some of these strategies can really contribute to some of it. But again, we have to be very careful, especially again, if we're looking at green roofs again, they would need water requirement as well. So it is again to look at there needs to be certain amount of design considerations, water considerations, resource consideration, and so on. Of course, at the end of the day, it is about which one suits the best. Thank you, Steve.
Comalie. It's coming up to 9 o'clock now, and I know you're all busy people and you need to get to work. So it just remains for me to thank you very much, Comalie, for a really interesting presentation there. Thank you all for attending. As always, if you would like a CPD certificate or a copy of Comalie's presentation, please just either email me or drop a quick message in the chat here. That will be fine. We're back here 2nd of May for our next Thursday, and we'll have Professor David Heatham talking to us about AI. Not sure exactly what, because it's obviously a huge topic, but whatever David comes up with, it will be interesting, I assure you. So we look forward to seeing you there. Details will be coming out in the next week or so on the email. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you very much, Doctor, for a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much.
Glad you enjoyed it. Take care.
Very much so. Thank you so much.
Good. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.